Hey everybody, it's July 5th, let's talk PlayStation. So last week we actually tried music on the show, and a good positive response. I'm glad to see that. Of course, the number one thing was it was a little too low. I don't want to make it high enough to the point where, you know, it got annoying or it bugged you right off the bat because I just tried it without even, like, mentioning it. But I guess we'll raise the volume up a little bit more, and we'll keep working it together, you know, you and me. Let's just figure this stuff out, and let's see what makes the best show possible, alright? But with slightly louder music out of the way, let's go into our first news story, PlayStation Network. Hey, if you've been wanting more ways to buy on PSN, you can now do that. You can now charge PSN purchases to your phone bill. You can sync your number with PlayStation Network, and basically, if you don't want to buy a game just right off the bat right now, you say, hey, I want to buy Guacamelee, a great PS3 and Vita cross-play, cross-buy sort of situation. You can charge that to your phone bill rather than your, rather than your PSN wallet, or just pay right there with a debit card, or whatever you want to do, right? So in short, this is another way to give Sony money. So let's paint a little scenario. It's holiday 2013. Fast forward, you walk into your local GameStop and boom! This is what you see. Yes, indeed. So Sony has kind of teased a little bit of how they're going to do sort of retail space. They kind of posted these pictures up, and hey, look at that. That's a lot of freaking blue, right? Holy crap. Oh my god, I'm almost fainting over here. Basically, these pictures are some mock-ups of what Sony's going to be doing in the retail space, and, from the looks of it, they like the color blue a lot. Alright, so enough blue. Do you remember Warriors Lair? It was announced a very long time ago. Originally, it was named Ruin, and it was for PS3 and Vita. It was sort of a dungeon crawler, kind of like Untold Legends or Diablo. That has now been canceled. Basically, IGN contacted Sony, said, hey, where's this game? And Sony basically said the game is no longer in development. And this was a game that was announced a very long time ago when Vita was, before Vita even came out. And it was really, really interesting. Got a lot of positive press, and, we were looking forward to it because it was a nice original game. It was, something new, but it got canned. I mean, we hadn't heard about it in a very long time. At one point, IGN tried contacting them, and they did say that it was still in development, but now they've contacted them again a couple months later, and it is... And this totally sucks. I loved Untold Legends on PSP. I was really looking forward to this on Vita, and now it's gone. And it's another one of those things where, like, these original titles, we want original games on Vita. All we've got right now really is Tearaway and Killzone Mercenary to look forward to, which is awesome. I'm looking forward to them, but now it sucks that, like, another one of those games is now off the grid. So hopefully Sony has something coming up for TGS or Gamescom in terms of original, huge, full-scale Vita games, but... we'll have to wait and see on that. Moving on, PlayStation Plus. Of course, it's Sony's service. You buy into that bad boy and you get free games. Sony basically put out a press release to say, hey, this is why PlayStation Plus kicks ass. Basically, Sony is celebrating its first year of the Instant Game Collection. The Instant Game Collection, of course, being that right when you get into PlayStation Plus, you have games right there to start playing. And they basically put out a little picture and everything. They gave away 64 games in the first year of the service within PlayStation Plus. And if you do a little bit of the math, the games obviously are huge in value, over $50, of course. Some are saying upwards to $1,000. But of course, it really fluctuates in terms of you could go to GameStop and get a game for $10 compared to, if it's $60. But regardless, it's certainly more than $50 a year. But hey, the thing is, tons of news outlets are picking this up. This story's making headlines. And of course, this is what Sony wants. They want it to look good and in the eyes of the people. And sort of, I guess, again, take away from all the backlash they're getting that they're now requiring it for online play on PS4, saying, look, you do have to pay for it if you want to play online. But look at what we give away and look at why it's so great, and this is why you definitely have to get onto this service. It's actually pretty ironic that me, of all people, I don't have PlayStation Plus. I've had it before, but my subscription usually just lapsed over and I didn't renew it. But hey, man, I'm going to have to jump onto it come PS4, and it is, a good service, so I'm alright with it. So kind of the big headlining news story this past week is that Sony's been talking a lot about the past and their philosophies and how they've worked and how they're moving forward. It's just kind of like a whole company approach and understanding that's been going on this past week. Shuhei Yoshida, Jack Tretton, Andrew House, Mark Cerny, all of them have been talking this past week about the company and how they're moving forward and how they've understood their problems in the past. So there's a quote I want to talk about. Shuhei Yoshida was speaking to the Europe PlayStation Forum, and he basically said, the only reason people look to spend several hundreds of euros to get a dedicated game system is because there are experiences that are only available on PS4. That's the message we really focused on in New York, back in February 2013 when they announced PS4. There's this kind of attitude that we had back in the PS1 days. Games are all about having fun, right? That's kind of the whole theme going on right now. PS1, how the company is basically going back to its roots of what they did in the PlayStation 1. And it really strikes a chord with what Shuhei Yoshida said, of course. Games are all about having fun, right? Absolutely, yes. But moving back to the whole PS1 thing, when Andrew House was talking to The Guardian, he was talking about how Sony is going back to their roots. They're going back to how they were with PS1. They're focusing on games. They're not making it necessarily overly complicated to make games on the platform, to get them out there, to start developing. One interesting thing in particular is that Mark Cerny had a very long presentation at Games Lab, and he was talking about his whole experience with Sony, how he's been working with them for years, and basically kind of going into the fact that how he became the architect of the PlayStation 4, and how he's changing the philosophies within Sony to be more like it originally was, and how to go back to sort of the success they had before. So yeah, Mark Cerny's talking about how they were going back to the PS1 days. Now, if you don't know, Ken Kutaragi is basically the father of PlayStation. He was the guy at the forefront of PS1, PS2, PS3. And he's basically responsible for the advancement in the systems and the advancement of their architecture and how they became much more complicated into each time. PS2 became more complicated than PS1, and then PS3 was vastly more complicated than PS2. And when Mark Cerny finally took over, because, you know, Ken Kutaragi kind of stepped down, he went to the, the board, and he's not necessarily involved in all these major decisions anymore, Mark went backwards into the fact that he went back to the PS1. He made it the PS4 easy to develop for. One of the big things he was talking about is time to triangle. Time to triangle basically means how long it takes for you to get workable graphics onto the system, something you can actually see and start to use and start to develop. You know, it's like laying a foundation. The PS1 took about 1 to 2 months to triangle, to get workable graphics on the system. PS2 took about half a year, and then PS3 took about a year. So if you wanted to make a PS3 game, it took you about a year to have a foundation to start making games. Mark Cerny is saying that what he's done with the PlayStation 4 and how they're going back to the roots, PS4 is back to PS1. It takes about 2 months to get workable graphics on the system. They're really just throwing away that attitude of, we're the best, we're awesome, you're going to buy our products, which is kind of how it was going into the PS2, and that's how it really was going into the PS3. All of this, even just from a business perspective, it's like, you know, when you start losing money and you're losing customer support, you got to do something. You got to start changing, and you got to start pressing forward. It seems like any company that starts to get a little bit of market share really starts to get cocky and really starts to make these changes to their corporation and how they run. And of course, even Microsoft's learning that now. And of course, Sony has learned it. Speaking of Sony learning lessons, if you didn't see it, Jack Tretton was on IGN's show Up at Noon, and he was, talking about, PS4 and PS3 and stuff like that. Just a couple of interesting things that he did say in the interview. PS3's price. Basically, he said that they learned lower is better than higher. This is, of course, in reference to PS3's price, and it's good to hear Jack Tretton say this, so certainly they know that was a bad decision back then. What's funny is how Greg Miller brought up, Microsoft's change on DRM and used games and all that. Jack basically said, I guess they got the message. Oh yeah, they got the message all right. But of course, Jack did reiterate that this is the start of a very long-term sort of thing on the market. They're not thinking that they're going to be winning all of a sudden. They're still very humble about it, and the fact that we still have a long way to go to prove to consumers to buy our system. So obviously they should be proving it because they're a corporation and they can't just have this cocky attitude. Sony learned it, Microsoft is learning it, and thousands of corporations across the world have learned this. Just because you're number one doesn't mean you're hot and you should put your consumers behind. Those are just some of the news stories I wanted to talk about this week. That concludes this episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Panecki. Thank you for talking with me. I'll see you next Friday.